Okay, back to talking about Green Lantern now again. As I said in the Emerald Dawn/First Flight video, Geoff Johns' secret origin story is the superior remake that the 2011 movie with Ryan Reynolds was supposed to be based on. And to explain how that comic story was everything that movie should have been, I am naturally going to do what I usually have done with comics and movie adaptations. Before starting with the story commentary, I feel obligated to add some needed background information. Green Lantern Secret Origin first came out as a story arc in the middle of Geoff Johns Green Lantern comic book run that started with his and Ethan Van Sciver's Green Lantern Rebirth miniseries in 2004. That was the series where Hal Jordan had been cured/exorcised from being possessed by Parallax after Emerald Twilight had happened, and he had atoned for those sins as the Spectre. Going into the monthly comic series, Geoff Johns not only rebuilt the Green Lantern lore in undoing their yellow weakness having been caused by Parallax, and getting rid of it led to Sinestro taking over it, which then led to the Sinestro Corps War, which has never been properly adapted because you need non-Green Lantern characters like Cyborg Superman and Superboy Prime included into it. And even if you try to cut them out, you would still need so much set up before it kicks off. Anyway, Sinestro Corps War culminated with the Guardians of the Universe letting their Green Lanterns use lethal force against the Sinestro Corps, which turned out to be what Sinestro wanted in the first place, and then he let himself be taken into custody in acknowledging having won. As the next story arc after it opens with Hal talking with Sinestro before his trial, Geoff Johns needed to do a past story that worked as Hal's origin story and the basis for his relationship with Sinestro in general. Again, if you have seen my Injustice Year 2 video from 2021, you should remember the short version of it that I told there. And before we start with the story commentary now, I will be using my hardcover copy of Green Lantern Secret Origin, which is not only translated into Finnish, but also has Ryan Reynolds on the cover. I don't think I need any more justifications to compare these two stories than that. The story first begins to establish how the narration in it is told in past tense by Hal to someone else, before it then moves to the same opening as in Emerald Dawn, with a young Hal Jordan watching his father Martin fly a jet. In this time, however, Hal is accompanied by a young Carol Ferris, whose father Carl owns the plane Hal's father is flying. As the children talk highly back and forth about their future aspirations, Hal decides to go under the fence to see his father flying better, with Carol attempting to tell her father about it. But then that thing that also happened in Emerald Dawn happens, with a radio exchange between Martin Jordan and Carl Ferris revealing to the readers that the plane has oil leakage and other engine problems. Carl refuses to allow Martin to land the plane in front of investors in the spectating audience, and eventually the plane goes down in front of the young Hal. Some years later, the teenaged Hal is established as a troubled young man, looking for thrills at his father's old friend Ken Arden's airfield, and his widowed mother has to be called in to pick him up. In this version of the story, Hal is also established as the middle child talked down by his older brother Jack, while his younger brother Jim attempts to be the mediator between them. We then time skip to Hal's 18th birthday, where Jim is the first one to learn he has run away from home to apply for the Air Force. And another time skip then shows how Hal has become a test pilot who flies jets to their extreme limits and looks like he is damn proud of how many jets he has crash-landed during test flights. One night after having gotten into a bar fight with the US Marine Corps, which includes Jon Stewart as a cameo establishing how close to the same age they are supposed to be, Hal is approached by Jim to tell him that their mother is dying from a cancer, and that she refuses to see Hal as long as he is still flying in the air, with Jack and Jim also refusing to let him visit their mom. Hal being Hal then decides to deal with this dilemma by sucker punching his superior officer in the next day's disciplinary meeting, so that he can be dishonorably discharged from the Air Force and go see his mom. Too late, as she has already passed away by the time Hal arrives to the hospital. To make it worse, Jack blames Hal for their mother's death by claiming that him running away from home to join the Air Force had amplified her worry over his safety with all the crash landings he did to develop into the cancer that killed her. And this has been just the first issue of the story in showing how Hal's origin story started out like that Linkin Park song. Just in time for Green Lantern Abin Sur to be shown interrogating an Usmatian criminal named Atrocitus about the prophecy of the Blackest Night. The second issue shows Abin Sur on his way to Earth on a ship with Atrocitus and reporting back about it to Sinestro, needing to know more about a prophecy that could lead to his own death. By this time on Earth, Hal has gotten a job as an assistant mechanic at Ken Arden's airfield under Tom Kalmatu, but being talked down by the other pilots pushes Hal into wanting to get back in the air. Besides just being told no, Hal is also told that the airfield is being sold to Ferris Air, now being represented by the grown-up Carol, who clearly does not think fondly of Hal, who decides to go think about better days in the saved wreckage of his father's old jet. Meanwhile, in the orbit, Abin Sur experiences his prophecy becoming self-fulfilled as fear breaks his concentration in keeping Atrocitus restrained and freeing the villain to fatally wound Abin before escaping the ship. So Hal Jordan's origin story sees Abin Sur crash land to Earth and tell his ring to look for a successor while also recording a message to Sinestro before Hal is eventually picked up and brought to Abin to receive his Green Lantern ring. Notice when suiting up, Hal has a white circle on his suit, because after recreating another scene from Emerald Dawn in also introducing us to Hector Hammond as a future villain, Hal goes back to give Abin Sur a proper burial before collecting his Green Lantern battery and charging his ring with it, then makes Hal fly through the space to planet Oa, so he can be trained like all the other new recruits with a white circle by Kilowog. Hal, being the first human that these aliens see, causes him to stand out long before he ends up singling himself out for Kilowog to make an example out of due to his attitude, which also includes learning the hard way how the Green Lantern rings don't work on yellow. After that, Hal is pulled aside by Tomar-Re, recognizing him to have Abin Sur's ring and wanting to hear how his ring passed on to Hal, with the news of Abin having used a ship making it clear to Tomar-Re that Abin Sur had given into fear and doomsday predictions in the Book of Oa. As Tomar-Re shows Hal Abin Sur's story already written on it and tells him that all their stories will be written onto it one day, he also tells Hal not to repeat Abin's mistakes and ask his fellow Lanterns for help when he needs it. Meanwhile on Earth, as Hal next goes through a months or so long training montage to earn a logo on his white circle, United States Air Force consulting Hector Hammond finds Abin Sur's crash-landed ship and Atrocitus slaughters his way through them while preaching about what happened to Sector 666. Then we finally get to see Sinestro being briefed on everything that has happened so far, and told unofficially to regroup with Hal on Earth to properly investigate Abin Sur's death by Ganthet. We eventually catch up by the time when Hector Hammond starts his supervillain origin story in becoming a telekinetic telepath, and Hal is discovered by Tom Kalmatu, who has figured out that Hal is Green Lantern due to having fallen asleep out in the open with his ring and lantern battery. Tom also tells Hal that most of the pilots resigned from Ferris Air in mass for not believing in Carol's leadership in the absence of her father, which Hal decides to go do as well, while also deciding to rant at Carol what he thinks about her father having caused his father's death. Carol easily shuts down Hal and gets him to leave, before realizing that Hal is still a pilot and can only fly for her since no one else would hire him if he quits. Hal, realizing that she is talking facts, ultimately falls when Carol's strong exterior briefly breaks to remind him of when they were both kids. And meanwhile, Atrocitus uses his own alien black magic, foreshadowing the Red Lantern Corps' oath.
With blood and rage of crimson red, ripped from corpse of some freshly dead, together with our helichate. We burn you all. That is your fate.
To learn who will be making his prophecy for the Blackest Night come true. William Hand, whose family runs a funeral service and he himself seems to be too fascinated by the deceased. Back to Hal, we see him getting his shot to fly a jet again from Carol, and that is when Sinestro arrives to make contact with him. Having decided to fly the jet without his ring already makes a poor first impression, as Sinestro destroys the jet while forcing Hal's ring to return to him, while Sinestro's status as a veteran looking down on Hal doesn't do any favors for him either. Fortunately, when flexing his superiority with a Green Lantern ring to Hal, Sinestro decides to fix the jet he destroyed and tell Hal why he is there, during which Hal's ring responds to Sinestro's presence to reveal it has a message for him. Before letting Sinestro hear it, Hal decides to return the fixed jet to Ferris Air, where multiple things lead to another. Carol comes to chew on Hal for what happened up in the air. Hector shows up unable to speak and mostly communicating telepathically while floating in the air telekinetically, and then turns hostile at them like a jealous boyfriend who doesn't understand what NO! Means. Then Sinestro shows up, likely impatient for Hal to come back to talk to him about Abin's message to him, and deals with Hector while also providing Hal with an alibi by appearing as a Green Lantern while Hal is in his flight suit in Carol's company, and then there is the sun obscuring Sinestro's face. But then Hal disappears from Carol's company, so it won't last. Meanwhile, Atrocitus creates a gun for himself from scraps of Earth technology. On their way to where Abin Sur crash landed and Hal buried him, Hal and Sinestro find some common tune in questioning orders given to them by their superiors about why their rings don't work on yellow, and after landing, Sinestro shares to Hal that Abin Sur had been his mentor as a rookie. As they talk, Hal's ring begins to play that message from Abin Sur to Sinestro, which after giving a posthumous teacher praises student blessing to him, next reveals the tragic secret behind Atrocitus' motivations. Long before the Guardians of the Universe created the Green Lantern Corps with sentient power ring users, they had used programmed manhunter robots to guard the 3600 space sectors in the universe, until they glitched out and massacred everyone in the space sector 666 and left only 5 survivors, the group known as the 5 Inversions, with Atrocitus being one of them. The group spent eons after their survival aiming to get revenge on the Guardians, which left them into researching
the true darkness!
And learn about the prophecy of the Blackest Night, which by the way is going to start here on Earth. That is when Sinestro realizes to ask Hal if there was another body in Abin's ship, and his confusion confirms that Atrocitus survived to be at large on Earth. We immediately jump next to Atrocitus having found William Hand at his family's funeral home, where he was very close to doing something disturbing with a passed away girl's remains, and with Hal and Sinestro arriving to save William, except that the weapon Atrocitus had built earlier is capable of draining their rings and forcing them to pull a tactical retreat. While Atrocitus returns to hunt down William and exposit that killing him would kickstart the Blackest Night, Sinestro shows Hal how to use a pocket dimension to keep Green Lantern's power battery handy to pull out for situations like this, and so they manage to recharge their rings. And again, they managed to rescue William from Atrocitus at the last moment, with Sinestro also lecturing Hal for fighting too much with his anger, as well as getting told by Atrocitus that he is foreseen to become, well, this. But Atrocitus is vague enough not to give too many details about it, as well as being too distracted with Sinestro not to notice Hal using a jet construct against him through a yellow steam shovel. Sinestro is too focused on what Atrocitus said to notice that, and also hits back with a construct of Kilowog while hyping up his own greatness. With Atrocitus defeated and tied up, William runs away, while Hal next tries to get Sinestro to believe he used his ring against something yellow. This just causes Sinestro to tell Hal what someone should have told him instead, but ultimately has a point in telling Hal not to fight with his anger and grow up from what he hates. Hal so takes that advice and tells his ring to take him to where Carl Ferris is, so that he can finally give the man a piece of his mind about his role in the death of Hal's father. In his anger, Hal is pretty much taken via autopilot to a house, where Carol answers the door and forces himself inside to find a sick old man sleeping on what could be his deathbed. The sight calms Hal down enough to hear Carol out on how her father got sick the year prior, and that is why she had to step up on leading Ferris heir. Carol also tells Hal that his father's death, on the top of her mother's death, was also a heavy burden to her father, while Carol herself, having been a spoiled brat, also made it tough enough to raise her as a widowed single father. This is pretty much the same moment that Emerald Dawn had, to have Hal recognize the damage he had done by being angry at Carl Ferris for his father's death, the same way how Hal had to take responsibility for his drunk driving and doing better in moving on in his life. Ultimately, this visit has caused Hal to recognize how much he has wasted his life at being angry at people who didn't deserve it, and leaves while apologizing to Carol after they have shared a hug as two lonely people. Later, Hal meets up with Sinestro again and tells him about it in different words and actually thanks Sinestro for having talked down to him earlier. Unfortunately, the beginning of this beautiful friendship is interrupted when they are both recalled back to Oa to be confronted by the Guardians. This was still from that time before the Corps would work together as Hal and Sinestro have, so of course the Guardians want them to explain their actions to them. Sinestro takes over in explaining how they work together to hunt down Atrocitus for the murder of Abin Sur, which the Guardians acknowledge while still scolding them for having worked together outside of Sinestro's own space sector. Hal then starts to ask why is any of what they have done a bad thing, and then confronts the Guardians about the Manhunters and the massacre of Space Sector 666, which clearly strikes a nerve but doesn't stop Hal. He brings up more questions about the yellow weakness and how the Guardians' citadel is yellow, in accusing the Guardians of being afraid of their Green Lanterns and wanting the Corps to overcome their fears. Sinestro then steps up to support Hal in agreeing with him about the Corps working together to prevent the massacre of Space Sector 666 from happening again, and to bring up that one of the Guardians identifying as Ganthet sent him to Earth in the first place. The Guardians reluctantly agree in recognizing Sinestro as one of their best, and next assigning him to deliver Atrocitus back to his imprisonment on Usmat. So we get a happy ending, with Hal trying once more to use his ring on yellow with witnesses, with only Tomar-Re believing that he used to be able to do it. Sinestro, while skeptic, turns to leave for his assignment, but not before agreeing to meet up with Hal again in a month, and inviting him to Korugar when they next meet. Before the story closes, we get to see how Hal's future villains like Hector Hammond are, as well as how William Hand managed to pick up Atrocitus' weapon to set him up to become Black Hand. Sinestro, when returning Atrocitus to Usmat, is told another self-fulfilling prophecy about what will happen to Korugar. We never got to see Geoff Johns' version of Sinestro's fall, but we can assume that trying to prevent what Atrocitus and Kul told him eventually drove Sinestro into becoming the dictator we saw in Emerald Dawn 2. Finally, we see Hal first getting his relationship with Carol set up in its early beginnings, and then meeting up with his younger brother Jim to apologize for not having been a good enough brother. Starting with letting him know about being a Green Lantern and telling this very story to Jim as he has written it down. Green Lantern's secret origin had Geoff Johns take everything that worked in Emerald Dawn 1 and 2 and put into this new version with his own spin on it. Besides just going over Hal's emotional growth, it also expanded his trauma of witnessing the death of his father with what kind of impact it had on the rest of his family and the friends of his family like Carol and her father. Carol was also shown with more screen presence and agency than she had shown to have in Emerald Dawn, with Ivan Reis's artwork portraying her both as a strong businesswoman who can still have her moments of weakness. Then there was the whole opening with Hal's brothers and mother, which played out like that Linkin Park song. Hal tried so hard to become a pilot and got all the way to become a captain in the Air Force, but in the end it didn't matter because it alienated Hal from his family when his mother was in the hospital. He then took a fall to lose it all via dishonorable discharge, but in the end it didn't even matter because she died before Hal arrived to the hospital. That also tied well with how Hal was the first human to be chosen into the Green Lantern Corps with all that baggage, along with the concept of the White Circle rookies who need to be taught through a training montage to earn their Green Lantern logos on their chests. Seriously, that is a good concept to make it look not too easy to become a Green Lantern, and really needing to work to earn the logo onto the White Circle. The villain was also a proper improvement from Legion, with Atrocitus not being colored yellow like the Green Lantern's old weakness, and also being an individual person with clearly understandable motivations to hate the Guardians and their Green Lanterns to the point of having a proper plan to get his revenge through the Blackest Night. Hector Hammond, on the other hand, felt more like a plot device for when the story needed a telepath to go over Hal's and Carol's feelings and emotions. And like William Hand, his presence was also used to set them up as future villains that had already appeared in Geoff Johns Green Lantern run. But Sinestro was a true improvement from Emerald Dawn 2 by showing him as a good guy whom you'd expect to be chosen to have become a Green Lantern. Sure, he still showcased superiority as a veteran in his first meeting with Hal, but that attitude mellowed down quickly when they both had to focus on hunting down Atrocitus, which also saw Sinestro acting like a proper mentor to Hal in a combat situation, how to properly channel his emotions with a Green Lantern ring, and then stood up for him when they were both confronted by the Guardians. You can properly believe that this Sinestro and Hal could have been friends, unlike the Emerald Dawn 2 Sinestro, just like he later admits to Hal in the aftermath of the Sinestro Corps War. It is tragically sad looking back at what could have been a proper brothers-in-arms friendship, if whatever it was that happened in this continuity to make Sinestro fall from grace, by being told a similar self-fulfilling prophecy as Abin Sur was about his death. I have more to say about the comic, but again, it's better to be said while acknowledging the movie with its similarities and changes, so... What the hell am I watching? Did this movie also have a Ultimate Edition? He gets distracted, he stops, and boom! It made changes, but also try to balance them out with what happened in source material, but they don't balance out. This is like having an actual conflict that was in the source material and brushing it aside so that you won't need to deal with it. Okay, in the 2011 Green Lantern movie, directed by Martin Campbell and starring Ryan Reynolds as Hal Jordan, we have an expanded sequence of Hal's childhood set in 1993, in which Martin Jordan gets to exit the cockpit before being distracted by his son having run after his landing jet and then blowing up with it. Also, a young Hector Hammond is included in this sequence to establish him to be close to same age as Hal and Carol. Or that was in the version of the movie I found online for this video. Fast forward to the present day of 2011, Hal's entire career in the US Air Forces is cut out and he is already working as a test pilot for Ferris Air, which is ran by a not in his deathbed Carl Ferris, who has been preparing his daughter Carol to take over, probably because that was in the source material. By the way, Blake Lively playing Carol was 24 years old when this movie came out, and it was more believable in the comic for her to have assumed the role of CEO to cover for her father's failed health, rather than having this movie give it to her just because. Tom Kalmatu, the mechanic from the comic, is in the movie played by Taika Waititi, and upgraded into working at flight control in Hal's and Carol's first test flight in the movie. He is also said to be Hal's best friend, and is the first person Hal calls to pick him up after Abin Sur has given him his Green Lantern ring, but more about that later. Hal is also not portrayed like the pariah he was to his family in the comic, as he is shown attending one of his nephew's birthday parties, and due to Ryan Reynolds' casting, I would assume that Hal was changed into being the oldest child rather than the middle child when compared to the actors portraying Jack and Jim. Also, Hal's mother is still alive, and we won't get to see Hal's family again in the movie after this party. Next up in moving to talk about the Green Lantern mythos in this movie, the antagonist is changed from Atrocitus into this thing that is... Okay, I'm not going to call it Parallax, because it's obviously not the living embodiment of fear that Parallax is supposed to be, but rather one of the Guardians who allowed himself to be corrupted by a yellow lantern battery hidden somewhere on Oa. Sounds like Appa Ali-Apsa, the Guardian who went mad early on in Gerald Jones' run in the 90s. Okay, so the main villain of this movie is Appa Ali-Apsa, the mad Guardian corrupted by fear, which also happens to Hector Hammond when examining Abin Sur's remains, but more about that later. The Guardians are surprisingly powerful on their own, as shown when they took out the Anti-Monitor during the Sinestro Corps war, which is why the Anti-Monitor covertly took them and the Green Lantern Corps out of the board early on in Crisis on Infinite Earths. So, it is believable that this brownish-yellow cloud scaring people and absorbing their frightened souls is just one of the Guardians of the Universe with his already existing powers maxed out and gone mad with power. Just like Appa Ali-Apsa was. But otherwise, that just makes the main villain another version of Legion, who, believe it or not, was apparently intended to be the main villain before the rewrites changed it into this thing that the movie calls Parallax. Just to make this as clear as possible, Parallax is an eldritch horror-like being as the living personification of fear, in the form of the first living being that felt fear, and so knows how to empower itself by making others feel fear. Also, Parallax does not act independently like this, and would need a host to wreak havoc. You cannot kill it by just throwing it into the sun, as it was the original reason for the Green Lantern's weakness to yellow, because the Guardians had locked it inside their central power battery. That is why, after it was created as a concept in Green Lantern Rebirth and taken over by Sinestro in Sinestro Corps War, Parallax was imprisoned separately in pieces inside Hal Jordan's, Guy Gardner's, Jon Stewart's and Kyle Rayner's power batteries. That imprisonment didn't last long, but you should get the idea on how easily this thing could have been explained in a sequel not to be the real Parallax. Back to talking about the movie, the not Parallax was previously somehow trapped on planet Ryut, also known as Usma, the Lost Sector, aka Space Sector 666, and then escaped way too easily when some NPCs came across it. Abin Sur is so killed off the same way like in Emerald Dawn 1, without any justification on why he was traveling on a ship, or maybe it was for a failed evacuation mission, and he just randomly crash lands to Earth on an escape pod. After Hal has been given his ring and uses it for the first time to defend himself unintentionally with a fist construct, he is then immediately taken to Oa. Oh, and assuming that the Green Lantern Corps has not been allowed to use lethal force, since the Sinestro Corps war has not happened, those three guys should have survived from that sucker punch. So, when Hal is brought to Oa, there is no white circle rookie face for him, and he is immediately given his logo-included uniform, before being made to feel bad for having inherited Abin Sur's ring in a speech that Sinestro, played by Mark Strong, gives to the entire corps.
An enemy we don't yet fully understand. We do know it's powerful enough to destroy entire civilizations.
I wonder what plans
Powerful
that they
enough
would
to
have
defeat
actually
even
had in...
Abin Sur, finest warrior, whose light can never be replaced.
Well, that's a... Then Hal is given a rush training montage by Tomar-Re, voiced by Jeffrey Rush.
I am Tomar-Re, protector of Sector 2813 and home to
80,012 galaxies, 2.34 million sentient species.
And Kilowog, played by the late Michael Clark Duncan.
Welcome to Ring Slinging 101, or as I like to call it, the worst day of your worthless life.
Which only gives Hal the idea how to defeat not Parallax in the climax with Sun's gravity, and then Sinestro comes to bully Hal into rage quitting his training and leave Oa. This feels rushed.
Jordan. Abin Sur was a great warrior. My mentor, my friend. You insult his memory by wearing his ring.
This feels like another cliché.
I'm done. He's right. I'm only human. We're not ready to defend the universe. Up until a few days ago, we thought we were the only ones in the universe.
They should have just given Hal the white circle and put him in with the other white circles. But that was probably not in the budget. I assume the $200 million budget couldn't keep up with the CGI needed to have more than needed scenes set over there. They probably cut costs by not having the Guardian Citadel be yellow too. Anyway, back on Earth. Hector Hammond, who is not portrayed like the creep he was in the comic, is brought to do an autopsy on Abin Sur's remains by Amanda Waller, and coming into a contact with the yellow energy in a wound causes Hector to become a similar telekinetic telepath like he was in the comic. Unfortunately, whereas the comic used Hector sparingly to set him up for future stories, the movie overdoes it in giving him more characterization, which turns him into an unintentionally sympathetic bad guy, who has to be made into a bad guy in this movie because Hector Hammond is a Green Lantern villain. So he ends up sniffing Carol while hugging her after not having seen each other after a long time, and then later committing patricide to make his descent into villainy look more justified. An encounter with Hal while doing that then sends some connection message to not Parallax to come to Earth because Abin Sur previously somehow trapped it en route before the movie's events, so it wants revenge on the ring itself. That leads to that CGI fight, before which Hector is killed off, that would have probably cost less as a fight at a location like the graveyard. But before that, Hal visits Oa once again to try plead for help in his fight against not Parallax, and then decided to go do it himself when the Guardians tell him no, is enough for Hal to gain Sinestro's respect.
There is no way you can succeed. You will die, Hal Jordan.
I'll die trying.
Good luck, Green Lantern.
Okay, there got some respect from Sinestro. Not enough for him to join Hal in fighting the not Parallax, but to be there after Hal has won to help him back to Oa with Tomar-Re and Kilowog, and then tell the rest of the corps that Hal is a great guy. But then Sinestro also falls into that same hole as Hector did, with a mid-credit scene showing him put on a yellow ring and then wearing his Sinestro Corps costume. We also don't even get a mention of Korugar in the movie, or how it's going over there to foreshadow why Sinestro would take that yellow ring, unless the sequel would have rewritten it to be a flash forward. Speaking of which, the movie opens and closes with Tomar-Re uninspiringly narrating, when both Emerald Dawn and Secret Origin literally had the Book of Oa to give it a proper framing device to be told better. What else? Well, just like in real life with their actors, Hal and Carol are rushed into a relationship, unlike how the comic just had them in a more friendlier terms that could lead into them getting into a relationship later down the line. At the point of Geoff Johns' run when Secret Origins happened, Hal and Carol were not in a relationship yet either, and actually it took even after this movie had come out before Hal and Carol started a romantic relationship. But we can also know what was maybe the biggest reason why this movie failed. Too many casual fans in the general audience who only knew Jon Stewart's Green Lantern from the Justice League cartoon probably boycotted it, because they didn't know and probably also didn't care about who Hal Jordan is. Those people could have probably been reined in by giving Jon a cameo, like how Secret Origin had him appear in that Air Force vs Marine Corps bar fight. I'm sure Hal and Jon have laughed about it later when working together, so a setup like that would have most likely improved the movie's chances at getting a sequel, or not. After the movie crashed and burned, DC and Warner Bros. Also did a short-lived Green Lantern animated series that I could also cover at some point. Ryan Reynolds moved on to play Deadpool, and currently DC and Warner Bros. Have hired actors with a too big age gap to play Hal and Jon on a HBO Max show called Lanterns, which has been reported to have way too many red flags on it. That is the most positive impact that the 2011 Green Lantern movie has had after it came out. As for Geoff Johns' nearly decade-long Green Lantern comic book run, I have been covering it with Robert on his channel from Green Lantern Rebirth up to Sinestro Corps War, and we have plans to continue it towards the Blackest Night now that I got this video done. Go check out his channel and stay tuned for his video premieres that I will be on as a guest. I might be there to comment on our coverage in the premiere chat. As for what will be happening on my channel now on 2025, I have decided to strategize my upload schedule to one big video like this per month, so that I can plan out which videos to focus on at the time, and to give them subtitles for those viewers who need them. Next month I have plans on covering Batman Dark Detective for a Valentine's Day premiere. Why? You'll find out when it comes out. Now, if you would be so kind to acknowledge all the work I have put into this video by liking it, commenting what thoughts you have about the comic book source material, as well as the movie that tried to adapt it, share this video for more people to see in case the YouTube algorithm won't do that, and subscribe to my channel for future videos. Also, ding the bell to be alerted on Tuesdays and Thursdays, on which I will be streaming video games for a chance to chat with me, and may your heart be your guiding key.